You're listening to 16 Artists, a conversation series with young creators finding their way in the world. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Susan Bin and Ekoo Beck. If you don't know who these people are, make sure you check out part 1 of this conversation. If you'd like to hear about art as a healing alchemy, Lil Nas X's MONTERO music video, and Ekoo's project illustrating Indian boarding schools, then keep on listening. We left off our conversation with Susan Bin talking about art as a healing practice. Here she is.
Art as a practice, the different types of purposes it can serve as like a again like healing space. And also I struggle with that a lot because I can make jokes like, I don't do anything that matters, like I work in art. And I say that because like I'm an art major, I can say that. Like I wrote an essay about the blowjob scene in The Shining. I can say that art doesn't matter. But I think for me, like I took a long time trying to figure out like my space in art because I worked in the industry. And like I also want to be anti-capitalist. And there's a lot of things in the art industry too that very similar to things they tell you at Harvard, where it's like, well, you have to be, if you work at these certain places, if you get these certain jobs, if you get to, be a showrunner, it means you're special. You said earlier, like, deserve is a very weighted word because it involves this idea like you can deny an individual things because of labor, if that makes sense. You didn't work hard enough. So you don't deserve it because you didn't do the work. And I think that's bogus because the way the industry works, it's like it's all nepotism and it's a lot of good luck. And I've never seen someone who hasn't worked hard, like whatever the hell work means, this idea of deserving things like we deserve labor and like we as consumers deserve labor and people and land and materials. I think like we need to rethink that whole dynamic of what being a consumer is. And so when I thought about that, that's what kind of changed me as an artist, if that makes sense. Because we watch things mindlessly. I say we, I just mean like things are produced that a lot of money is put into. And they, at least inoculate the mass consumption about certain ideas. And I realized to me that is actually quite radical to believe in the idea that things that are invisible should be visible. And like one of the ways of doing that is like, opening up storytelling, viewership, and like authorship to people like marginalized communities, marginalized individuals, people who don't get to tell those stories, and like aggressively pushing for those stories to be told. That's kind of what I'm trying to do right now. Where again, like I hate this idea in the industry where it's like you read spec, you read things that are like, oh, this is a good writer, like this is someone who's going to make it. And I'm just like, I don't really care what you think is a good writer because Joseph Campbell wrote a book, like because, it hits these story beats. Like I'm more interested in being outside of a metric of it's successful because it made so like such and such return of investment in box office, or it's going to launch a consumer products franchise. So like, that's why it's successful. I think things can be one and done. And it's funny because like I feel like people reach out to me and they're like, wow, I can't believe you responded. Do you want to like help me shop this? And I'm like, yeah, you don't understand. It's like, I'm so sick and tired of white men and white women telling stories about whiteness. Like I'm sick of it. I want to hear other things. There's the only thing, this is a quote that I'm summarizing from a writer, Huno Diaz, where he talks about like, the idea of being a monster on a cultural level is not being reflected, being invisible in the things you see and write. He said, like, is something wrong with me that the whole society seems to think that people like me don't exist? And part of what inspired me was this deep desire that before I died, I would make a couple of mirrors, that I would make some mirrors so that kids like me might see themselves reflected back and might not feel so monstrous for it.
Yes, and it's this recentering or finding a new center. It reminds me of Ocean Vuong, who's a Vietnamese American poet who talked about, he wrote this book on Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous about his life growing up Vietnamese American in Hartford, Connecticut. And he was actually referencing James Baldwin in this interview when he talked about it, of this inspiration that he had to say, oh, this particular queer Asian American experience can be the center of the story. And Black and brown and yellow people are beautiful. And that's a radical statement. Well, actually, I want to ask Susan about like, this recent illustration that you made in response to Lil Nas X's
Oh,
incredible music video,
yeah.
MONTERO, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that was just I love that, I like th I'm probably thinking of a tweet, but, like, the idea that it's like all these senators, all these Fox News anchors are so mad at, like, a literal 21-year-old for being gay and fabulous, which and the idea too where, like, you're non-white, you grow up queer, you grow up hating that part of you or thinking you're invisible, and then being told, like, you're gonna go to hell. And then Lil Nas being like, well, I'm gonna look fabulous while doing it then. And then people have the audacity to be mad that he's kind of reclaiming the idea of what being a monster is. And it's just like, I love that. That's why I do this shit, because I think that shit is amazing. So that's why I do it, because I was like, this 20 this child, because, like, don't get me wrong, he's a literal infant, like, compared to how old I am, but sorry to listeners older than me. But I'm like, he's a hero. Like, he's my hero. Like, I could never be that brave. That is, I just like amazing. Like, so things like that. That's just me celebrating, because, like, I also do art that's like, I try to be mindful about what I create. And because, like, I illustrate, but I don't think of myself as an artist. Like, I don't pigeonhole myself to a noun. I think Stephen Fry said, like, I do art, or he says, like, I act, but I'm not an actor. I don't pigeonhole myself to a verb. Like, I'm a noun and I can do many verbs. So same hat. It's like I do art, and it sounds so stupid because I'm not doing anything that matters. Like, I make funny little animations, but I try to, well, I hold these, like, ideas, principles to myself about what I think my own art should be. And it's things where it's like, I want to actually, like, in certain ways deny pleasure, like deny people. Michael Haneke called it barrel down cinema, like this idea that it's a cinema of reception and not a cinema of questions. And so I like to make people feel uncomfortable because I think you start asking questions instead of confirming biases.
Iku, I'm assuming you've seen the video.
Yes. Oh,
Okay,
yes.
great.
Many
Yeah.
times.
Yes.
I claim him as a queer country icon and like person of color country icon, which Montana needs. So
Lil Nas and Trixie Mattel holding hands. I'm waiting for the collab.
Yes. I watched it at night on a Saturday, like not realizing what
Oh,
was
wow.
about to happen to me.
Unprepared wholly for for the religious experience you're about to have.
I felt so just seen by that video in a way that I didn't expect I needed to. I agree that he's a hero. I think he just opened a door for so many people.
Here I go quoting tweets. But I think, like, the one that spoke to me the most was like, y'all kept throwing this poison, and Lil Nas took it, turned it around, and made it turn all your toxins and made something healing with it. And I'm like, absolutely. Like, yeah, he did.
yeah, I definitely verbally screamed during my first viewing of it. I feel like my neighbors probably hate me at this point because they hear it like every morning.
Good for them. Good
Yeah.
for them.
I want to highlight this thing, Susan, that you mentioned about taking the toxins and transforming them through art into something healing. And Iku, I'm just curious if you could just speak more about this intersection between maybe healing, transformation, and art for you, and maybe also give us just a little more details about the kinds of work you're doing. You mentioned the mural, but I know you do other things as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really consider myself an artist, but yeah, I think I have a lot of grief, and I feel like a lot of people of color in the US do, a lot of people who are mixed in the US do. And I just had to find ways to deal with it that weren't extremely self-destructive. And it started out for me as beadwork and stuff like that. And more recently, my grandma went to Indian boarding school. My great grandma went to Indian boarding school. My great great grandma went to Indian boarding school. So did, I'm pretty sure, all of the other like ancestors that I come from on my mom's side of the family went to boarding school in Montana. And it's something that I've seen just like really impact my family and my community at large. Like, I think a lot of I mean, basically all of our issues, except for like the general issues that human populations have, can be traced to the continual experience of colonization, especially in a place like anywhere. In Montana, it's different than it was on the East Coast. The East Coast was very weird to me because it's older. Like Montana, the first white permanent settlement in Montana was in 1841. So it's like way like younger of a state than some other states. And yeah, so I have a lot of grief around that. And I feel like I don't have a lot of people to talk to about it. Like I'll talk to my fellow people of my age range about like this sad thing or whatever, but there's nothing that comes out of it where afterwards we feel anything has resolved at all. So one of my current projects is like I started drawing boarding schools. I have like 20 drawings or something now. And I didn't really draw that much before, but I started with boarding schools that my grandma had gone to. One of the things that's really interesting about boarding schools is that a lot of them only like one building, usually the chapel, still exists. The dorms almost always have been burned down in some mysterious fire. And so when I was growing up, I always went to every Memorial Day, I go to Holy Family Mission, which is, I'm going to go find my drawing of it, but it's like a place that my great grandma went to. I wrote my thesis on it. My dog's probably going to bark a lot.
Ooh, house tour.
She missed me. She's my joy right now. We got her in January, but I started drawing pictures of boarding schools. I was named after the first person in my family who went to boarding school, Ikutsumi Maki, who became Minnie. But that's my like the current stuff that I'm doing to work through my feelings is just like drawing these buildings that I know that I'll never be able to talk to my family members about because I'm not a trained trauma counselor. I'm not going to be bringing up people's greatest traumas and then just being like, so tell me about it. So I had to figure out some way, and I didn't feel like, I can't tell the stories. Some people like, which is totally fine, but some people will like draw what they feel like they think may have been the experience. I don't feel like I can do that because I just don't know the experience. Mm-hmm. So I just have like little drawings of different boarding school buildings, mostly chapels. You have to go through a bunch of archives to find the old photos of any of the other buildings. Like if you want pictures of any of the dorms, and there's just other than the chapel, nothing's there anymore. And I like wonder about whether the removal of like the physical object changes the remembering for the people who weren't part of that project. So like if you move to Montana and you live in Stevensville, you might notice like St. Mary's Mission because they have like a little weird like Indian statue and white person statue of like when the missionary met the Indians or whatever, and it was the first permanent settlement of missionaries in Montana, and it became Stevensville. But you probably won't see the physical buildings that people were oppressed within and like forced to live in. And I just feel like that's there are many original sins of this country if we're talking in like religious terms, and I think that boarding schools is one of them. And so yeah, I've just been trying to figure out ways to work through my feelings on it personally so that I don't like negatively impact the people around me. But I also know that healing from boarding school trauma is one of the things that needs to happen for Native people. Like it has to happen for us to survive.
Yes.
So that's
oh my goodness. I'm just in awe. If you were to give one piece of advice to yourself 5 years ago, right after you graduated, what would it be?
I guess two things really. First, just to tie in the themes of this podcast episode, even though I hate things like resolution, is to take poisons and make them into tonics. The second is a quote that I came into recently from Boots Riley while like sitting in on an anti-capitalism for artists thing, which is your ideology is what you practice. So it's not what you read, it's not what you tweet, it's not what you think it is, it's what you practice.
Iku, do you have
I
any?
think mine would be, and I'm trying to think of a less dismissive to my past self version of this.
Be
But
kind. Be kind.
yeah, be kind. Just like relax a little more. Things aren't as serious as you think they are, especially things around like what kind of job you get. And it's not as serious as you think it is, which honestly I went into my senior year feeling that, but then once I was finished and other people had jobs and I didn't have a job, I was like, oh no, don't worry about it. And like appreciate your time coming back down to earth and be open to learning from the people around you, which I think I was, but I would want to like really enjoy that time where you're coming down from being in this place that I'll never be in again because I don't want to, but of like being part of this high society and enjoy the come down from it.
Go on the stripper pole down to hell.
Yeah.
Like with the same grace.
Yes. Yes.
Enjoy
Same
this- enjoy the slide, the long
Mhm.
slide
Oh my
down the
gosh.
pole.
Yes.
You can learn more about Susan Bin and Ekoo Beck at 16artists.com. This episode is brought to you by the Office for the Arts at Harvard and the Harvard Alumni Association. The Yangqin music in today's episode is from yours truly. Final editing and mixing were done by Shez Manzour, with production support from Brice, Norton, Hennelly. If you have feedback or questions about this podcast, you can reach me directly at REYLXN on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. My name is Reylon Yount. Thanks for listening to 16 Artists.